Hello everybody, welcome to another tutorial. So there are about 1,000,001 facial proportions tutorials out there on the internet. So I've been thinking that for this tutorial, instead of taking you through the anatomy of a skull and all of that kind of thing, since that is something you can easily find on the internet, and we did it in the past 2 tutorials, I talked about skull anatomy. So for this tutorial of the 3/4 view, I'm just going to bring you along on the journey as I draw through a 3/4 view portrait, and then we convert it into male, female, and androgynous features. We are still going to be talking a little bit about proportions and anatomy and stuff, but I think what will be most helpful will actually be to see my regular process for you guys and explain what's kind of intuitively happening and going through my head as I draw, because every time I draw a face, I do not map out exact proportions and stuff every single time. I have a, kind of a fluid process as I draw, and I utilize like the eraser tool a lot to adjust as I go, because for me the drawing process is still a process of discovery, so I like to be a little bit flexible. Let's get started. So the first thing I like to do is draw a circle or a circle-like shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I start thinking about, okay, what direction is this face facing? So I draw the center line, the vertical center line that's going to split the face in half, basically. And then I start adding in the eye line. I actually like to draw the eye line, which means it's not going to be in the complete center of the circle. It's going to be a little bit below the center. But then I start thinking about the eyebrow line, which is in the center of the circle. So that's that second line that's kind of above the line that's wrapping around. So right now, I don't do this for every single one of my drawings, but for the sake of showing you guys, I'm making sure to draw in some of these guides, at least messily. But then adding in a rough indication of the jaw or the face. It's just kind of a simple structure that I like to add in before I even think about adding in like the nose or the mouth or anything like that. I want to define like, okay, I generally want to know what the shape of this face is gonna be. And then I come in with the eyebrows, just kind of using a little bit of that eyebrow, the very subtle eyebrow guide to know where the eyebrow's gonna be. And here, because remember, this is at an angle and skulls are round, so you have to remember that these guidelines are wrapping around the skull. There's a little bit of perspective going on, which is why I drew out the eyebrow guide all the way around. Next, I can come in and start to add a little indication of the nose. At this point, I'm actually not paying a ton of attention to the initial circle that I drew, because if you'll notice, the skull itself looks actually pretty small compared to the face I drew, and that means I'm gonna need to adjust that later. But this tends to be something that I actually do a lot in my process. The initial circle is just it's almost like a comfort circle, because I don't always stick to it while I'm drawing. But anyway, I knew I wanted this character to be the female character to start out, so I decided to bring up the jaw a little bit, soften it a little bit, and make her appear a little bit more feminine. And before I come in and start adding in that second eyebrow and kind of lining it up with that eyebrow line as it wraps around the skull. And then I can come in and start adding the eyes. Now, you guys, eyes are one of those things at 3/4 view that can be very tricky because of the perspective going on. And there's a couple things you need to be very careful of. So the first thing is that you have to remember these eyes should be the same height, even though the far eye is technically in perspective, and so it's going to be squished horizontally, it should not be squished vertically. The eyes should be the same height, and you'll see later on when I add more eye details in, I'm actually going to compare the heights. Another thing to keep in mind is that far eye. You don't want it sneaking off the face. You have to remember that because it's kind of a little bit behind the bridge of the nose, it's actually further into the face than you think. It shouldn't be going off the side of the face. This is something that I will do a lot by accident, is I make the eye way too off to the side, especially for that far eye. And then if you were to actually turn that head around, the eye would be on like the side of the skull and it wouldn't actually make any sense. So you got to remember to bring that eye a little bit in. You should probably at most angles, unless the head is really turned, you might see even a little bit of the side of the brow bone and stuff on the far side of that outside eye. So those are a couple really important things to keep in mind. Basically, squish the far eye horizontally, not vertically. Keep the eyes the same height, and then also make sure that that far eye is far enough in on the face and it's not sneaking off the side of the face. And then I already started to add the nose and the mouth, and I just kind of followed I drew a little circle to indicate the nose earlier, and I just kind of followed that and started drawing in the nose. And then the mouth I also lined up with just a little bit below the nose. Something good to keep in mind for the mouth is that lips come just a little bit out of the face. They're kind of like the nose comes out of the face a lot, right? But lips also can come out a little bit, and of course it depends on how big the lips on the character is, but it's something good to keep in mind. And so you'll notice that the top lip, it looks like it's kind of sticking out just because of the angle that I drew. Mostly the top lip. So it's good to keep in mind and kind of feel it and visualize it, like, okay, the lips are coming out a little bit, so what kind of angle is that going to look like if they're actually sticking just a touch out of the face. And nose and mouth, when I'm drawing, I don't usually go in and map out exact distances with guidelines when I am just drawing a portrait every time. And maybe that is because I know intuitively what kind of looks right and what kind of doesn't. Not that I'm perfect, I make mistakes all the time, but I kind of know what looks good, and if something is appearing off, usually I can recognize it, or I can ask somebody to take a look at it. It's a really good thing to be able to ask, like a friend or something. We're so used to looking at faces that even your non-artist friends will be able to detect when something is off. But at this point, we have the face basically drawn in, so I'm making these skull adjustments that I mentioned earlier, because the initial circle and skull that I drew is not quite right, not quite big enough for this face and this head. And then also bringing in that ear. So the ear height is usually between the brow and the bottom of the nose, and I just kind of try to stick to that and remember these guidelines. They should be wrapping all the way around the skull. You have to deal with perspective when you're working with 3/4 view. And so that's what I'm kind of trying to do here. It took, sometimes it takes a little iteration. I'm so used to drawing elf ears, so human ear proportions are just ridiculous. But usually I start out with just, a little circle or oval that sits behind the jaw and between the brow line and the bottom of the nose line is my general rule. With female foreheads, they tend to be forward a little bit more, so it's something good to keep in mind that the forehead doesn't slope back quickly with females. It stays forward a little bit longer and then slopes back a bit more suddenly once you get to kind of the top of the skull. So it's a good thing to keep in mind, and I will point out the difference as compared to our male portrait. But generally she's looking pretty good now. Bringing in the neck, making it quite slim for the lady. And I may even adjust her chin and her jaw here to be a little bit softer. Although she looks, really it looks all right. It's just kind of a style preference, like how how soft and feminine do I really want her design to be. I was feeling like her jaw and everything was feeling pretty strong, especially the line from her hair to her jawbone. So I'll be doing those adjustments. But at this point, it's just kind of details and refining. It's just like with a lot of my process, as I mentioned, being flexible and pushing different features with the eraser tool and experimenting and seeing what kind of looks I like. What will happen if I add a thicker line to the top of her lip, or what will happen if I erase a little bit of this angle or that angle. And that's generally how a lot of my drawing process goes with everything. It's a journey of experimentation and being flexible and kind of discovering the drawing more than me very intentionally knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, if that makes sense. And it makes it a lot more interesting for me to work that way. So I noticed when I flipped the canvas that there were definitely some issues with still the skull size. So I added more skull to the back of her head, and I continued to adjust her jaw and everything. And now I'm kind of going in with even more details to make her even more like, I don't know, just appealing, more feminine, more just style choices, really. But this is kind of, I can't hold myself back from it. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to add in a little bit of eye shine, a little bit of eyelid, maybe some eyelashes. And it's just something I really enjoy. And even with the sketch, I can't hold myself back. So once you have your eyes and the face drawn in, a really good thing to check is the corners of the eyes and see, like, okay, on this kind of sphere-like shape, are the corners of the eyes lined up? So that's a good thing to check. Another thing, what I'm doing right now, is I'm checking the eye height, seeing, okay, are the eyes the same height? And they were generally pretty good. But I thought this closer eye might be a little bit taller than the far eye. So I'm just going to check again. And yeah, actually they were pretty good. It would have probably been fine if I hadn't changed it. But I thought, oh, I can just make this far eye just a little bit bigger, because I have been bit in the butt, bit in the butt, whichever, so many times by publishing a piece of art and then noticing that far eye way too small. So now I would rather it be even a little bit taller than the close eye, just to be safe, just to overcompensate, because for the most part, I will accidentally do the opposite. So I figure by overcompensating slightly, I'm probably actually getting it about right, since I tend to make that far eye so small naturally when it shouldn't be the case. Making just a couple little nose adjustments, nothing too huge here. If I were to go back, I might want to angle that nose a little bit more, but I think it turned out all right. It all depends on the shape of the nose, if it's kind of a turned up nose or more of a hooked nose. And just these little details, and she's basically done. So we are actually going to move on to the male, and we're going to do kind of similar to what we did last time. Is I'm just going to duplicate her, and we're going to have this little challenge of converting this female portrait into a male portrait by just changing a few key things. And I think that this challenge is actually super duper fun, and I encourage you to do it. If you are someone who tends to just draw like one gender, like I draw a lot of females, right? This might be a really fun challenge for you. Basically, you take a portrait that you draw normally, female portrait, and then you just duplicate it and work on changing just some key features to turn this character into more of the opposite gender. So let's give it a try. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm adjusting these eyes. Male characters tend to have smaller eyes, sometimes a little bit more squinty eyes. And so I'm making the eyes a little bit smaller, and I'm actually going to scoot them up to be much closer to the eyebrows. And already that makes this character look a little bit more masculine. Something else I want to do is I want to bring this eyebrow angle that's on the kind of side of the face, so the silhouette of this eyebrow angle, and I want to bring it out away from the head a little bit more, because guys their eyebrows tend to protrude a little bit more out from their face than female eyebrows. So we're going to bring it out a little bit to make that brow line a little bit more strong. The next big thing I want to adjust is going to be the jaw and the chin and the length of the face. If you remember in the very first tutorial when we compared male and female skulls, the big difference was actually the length of the bottom half of the face. So making the nose a little bit longer and then pulling down the chin, just lengthening out that face. So basically you squish the eyes and the eyebrows closer together, and then you lengthen out the other features. So nose is longer, chin is longer. Okay, and I think that probably these eyes need to be even a little bit smaller maybe. But first, let's make this chin a little bit stronger. Give it this character more of a square jaw, larger chin. And already this character is looking a little more masculine in a kind of interesting in-between state right now. And then this nose, probably this guy does not need a little girly button nose, so we're going to give him a little bit of a stronger bridge, and I'm actually going to pull the nose out a little bit more. So when you're at a 3/4 angle, you have to remember that the longer the nose is, the more it's going to be poking out from the face, and that means it's going to probably cover a little bit more of that far side of the face because it's poking out away and covering more of the features. So pulling it out, making that stronger bridge. And then also guys tend to have thinner lips, so let's just try erasing that top lip. You can get away with coloring in the top lip for guys sometimes, but you just have to keep in mind that guys tend to have thinner, less prominent lips. So just something to know. And then the neck, of course, guys have a lot thicker necks and tend to have Adam's apples. How prominent they are, of course, depends on the guy, but making this neck thicker. And something that is kind of interesting is a lot of the times the back of the skull in guys there's quite a straight and sharp angle that can happen from the back of the skull down the back of the neck. So I tried to start bringing that into here, but also working back up into the eyebrows and making the eyebrows more prominent too. And yeah, when you are drawing guys, you just gotta really think angles. Get rid of the really soft curves in the features and add in more like straight lines, more angles, more corners, because male features just tend to have a lot more of those types of shapes and less curvy type of shapes, especially when you're working with like cartoon styles. And again, for me, this process is especially about discovery, because it's all about experimenting and pushing these shapes. Like, okay, so now this character looks more masculine, but can we make this character look even more masculine by thickening the eyebrows, making the brow or the jaw even stronger, pushing out the brow a little bit more? What do we do about the hairline? Should we bring it up a little bit more? And really like pushing to like, okay, I made this character look more masculine, but like, what can I do even more? And if you're someone who usually draws guys, maybe you do the opposite. Like, what can I do to add more curviness and delicateness to these features to make this character look more feminine? And it's just a really fun experiment to do. And it teaches you, okay, these are the key features that need to be changed when drawing the gender that I'm not used to drawing. These are the ones that can be adjusted to add more masculine or feminine kind of looks. So you may have noticed that I made the eyes even smaller, and am just really working to emphasize the shapes in the neck and the jaw, and really pushing this character. And I'm using the eraser and the pencil to define these angles and these shapes. But nay, now we got a guy. So let's take this guy, and now we're gonna go a little bit in the opposite direction and find more of a androgynous kind of character. I think that this one is going to be a little bit quicker for me, because taking a kind of masculine design and making it a little bit more female or somewhere in between is actually probably my specialty. And I do it unintentionally sometimes. But yes, just starting to soften out those angles, making the eyes a little bit bigger, and then also moving them down away from the eyebrows slightly. And already this character is looking like much more of a soft boy. And getting rid of the Adam's apple, although you could leave that in depending on how far on which side of the spectrum, you know, the character falls, but making the neck a little bit thinner, softening up the angles of the nose as well, but still maintaining that bridge of the nose, I think is important, rather than just letting it soften down into the face like it is with the females. And I mean, really, this is just a process of like softening up this character. If you made the chin really long, like I kind of did in the male, I brought the chin up a little bit as well. And I just noticed that I didn't angle the forehead back very much for the guy, but actually that is something to keep in mind, is that men's foreheads tend to angle back a little bit sooner than females. And I know I kind of mentioned the female's forehead earlier, but for men, foreheads angle back a little bit sooner than the females do on the skull. But that is basically it. We have a female, a male, and then a character that's kind of in between. I could see this character as either female or male or neither, so I would call that a success. I hope that this tutorial was helpful. I know it was maybe a little more loose, but I wanted to bring you guys through my process, especially when my process is a little bit more like flexible and loose. Like I mentioned, I'm not always mapping out every single proportion of the face. I will, of course, include the facial proportions, thing that I made for the female character, so you can feel free to look at it. The main things, again, to keep in mind are the eyebrow line is going to be in the center of the sphere, and of course the angle of the head will determine where that center is. The eyes are a little bit below that, depending on how masculine or feminine. That will kind of determine how much below that line the eyes are. But then the hairline, the center of the circle, the nose line, and the chin line, those are all going to be about similar distances apart. So those are the main things to keep in mind. Another tips are the eyes. Make sure the eyes are the same height, you guys. Make sure the eyes are the same height. And I think that's all from me today. I hope that this little tutorial / walkthrough was helpful for you guys, and I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your day. The next tutorial is probably going to be on painting hair. People have been asking like crazy, and that was the runner-up for last month's vote. So I think hair will be the next tutorial. So I hope you guys are excited for that, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for your support and being a wonderful patron who believes in my work. I really appreciate you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!